Welcome, everybody. It's Doug Bacon, Managing Director of Throwing Words. And today we have with us Lindsey Babcock. Lindsey is the Deputy Athletic Director at Wake Forest University. And we've had the privilege of working together over the past couple of years, and invited her on today to really talk some about all the transition and the change that's been happening initially from the pandemic and all that we've been facing together, but also some of the unique challenges in athletics. And so as we get into this, want to just share a little bit about Lindsey's background, and then we'll jump right in. So Lindsey joined Wake Forest Athletics in February of 2020. She previously had been running compliance, among other things, at Kansas State University. And her background is much deeper in college athletics at the time with the Atlantic Coast Conference and as well as in other institutions. And suffice it to say that she brings a wealth of knowledge to her work at Wake and in her role as Deputy Athletic Director. So really appreciate, Lindsey, that you making some time today, particularly with it being, you mentioned, about 8 days away from the first football game. So thank you, and we're glad that you're here.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right in. So you start your work at Wake in February of 2020, and then, and I'm sure you came in with a lot of plans that, you and John Curry, Athletic Director at Wake, had worked together previously when you both were at Kansas State. And so I know that a lot of intention and planning had gone into what was needed and just kind of the impact that you could have. So say a little bit about kind of your mindset as you were coming into it in February, and then we'll get to March 15th from there.
Right. Sure. Well, I did. When I came in, we had a 100-day plan, and it was in writing, and it was pretty clear. There were some goals and objectives pretty clearly stated that we wanted to accomplish. And I wanted to spend the first couple of weeks getting to know the staff and the area and just our coaches and athletes. And so I had kind of spaced out some of those goals and gave myself a little bit of a runway there so that I could get comfortable with the area and meet a lot of people on the campus. And so I took those first couple of weeks to just kind of ease in. And then COVID happened. So on March 13th was my last day in the office. So I was only in here for about 3 weeks. And then on March 13th, we had our last in-person meeting, and then we were sent home. And then I spent the next several months working from the dining room table, and my family was still back in Kansas. So ultimately, after a month or two, I decided, well, I'm just going to go back there and see them. So just trying to manage some of what was on that original list or even adjust what was on that list to current times, because there were some things that were irrelevant because our student athletes had gone home. We weren't playing sports at that time. We weren't recruiting. So some of those things I could put on hold, but there were other things that had to be adjusted. And a lot of that had to do around our HR process here, and had to deal with, everybody went through kind of a period of time where we were looking at employment, whether we had to do furloughs or whether we're, going to do any reduction of staff, and everybody was going through that process. So a lot of my focus at that point kind of turned to the HR world for a while I was still back in Kansas. And then slowly we integrated ourselves back into the office. When I was about 90 days in to the job, we kind of jokingly looked back on that 100-day plan, and it changed a lot. We did get to accomplish some things on that plan, but then we realized that other things just weren't relevant anymore, and so we had to adjust that and still try to kind of have some goals out there that we're still working on, but it definitely did not turn out to be the same thing that we set out to do in the beginning.
Yeah, because I can remember an early conversation that you and I had, which was probably in the first part of May of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It was still, and we were still talking the 100-day plan and some of the HR performance metrics and all of that. how did you, so all those things, as you said, some things you're able to put on hold, some things you needed to adjust and just kind of figure how to navigate all of this, and kind of like we were all doing, at that time. Um, and how were you? So I'm thinking here you are in Kansas, back in Kansas, you had 2 weeks to get to know people, which means you really didn't get to know, I mean, with the 200
Right.
person staff and a
Yeah.
university of thousands and hundreds, that's just not possible. So what made it work for you and for the department in terms of how you were able to stay connected with everybody kind of to the wind?
Yeah. I mean, well, obviously we all got very used to Zoom, and doing all of our Zoom calls, and our here we use WebEx, which I know a lot of campuses do, and it's frustrating. It was so funny how quickly we adapted to that. Our first couple Zoom calls, we were, everybody's, oh, what does this button do? And it was kind of fun. And then, we adjusted pretty quickly. One of the things I had to do was being in a different time zone, with an athletic director who likes really early morning meetings and things. So I had to kind of adjust my calendar and my schedule for that, making sure I could take those calls in the morning without waking up my entire family. And we were all dealing with that. We were all dealing with finding that quiet place in the house, and getting dressed only from the waist up, and not really leaving the house. And really thinking about too, I mean, kind of where it went deeper was what I was trying to do was build relationships with these people, and I was trying to do it through a computer or through a phone, which is really hard to do anyway, but also trying to reach out to them on a personal level and understand what they were going through from the pandemic, and understand, their struggles. And some of them had very young children or had elderly parents they were caring for in their home. And so there was just a lot of different stories that our whole staff, that all the staff had. And so it was really a time for me to get to know them as best I could through a device, but also try to connect and be able to relate and have some empathy sometimes for some of the things, if I'm trying to set something up and, gosh, Lindsay, I can't get to that because this is happening, just trying to learn those stories so that we could work better together. And in the end, when we came together, I feel like it did pull us together more. I feel like we do understand more about each other. We joked around about, oh, I recognize that room that you're sitting in because I saw it on Zoom every day or something like that. So, we have that, now we have that connection because we went through all of that together. And as did everybody, but we were speaking every day on the computer, on the phone. So it was just a very unique time.
Yeah. And so, you make it through the first 6-9 months, and again, all with, while you're facing what we all were facing from a pandemic standpoint and the remote and all of that and the uncertainty, you're still kind of making your way as a new leader in the organization, and getting the right staff in the right place. And of course, what we hadn't mentioned is that John had a 1-year head start on you, but he had come in March or April of 2019. So he's leading, casting his own vision, in the middle of all of this. But you reach a point where you can. Yeah, I know the phrase we talked about was preparing to sprint out of the pandemic, right? So you get through 2020, you're kind of coming into 2021. And I know that, the reality starts to set in of, we had priorities before the pandemic, and we were able to, things that we put on hold, and so how do we get back into really doing not just the reacting, responding to the pandemic, but also the strategic moves that need to happen. So how did that work? Again, you're there in a deputy role, kind of leading the internal operations of the organization. So what that look like as you are kind of being able to focus on more strategic and not just the immediacy of the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say, you know, it got, without even us really noticing, while we were in the pandemic, we were so focused on testing and numbers of positives and wearing masks and safety precautions and all these things that we were so focused on that we kind of, and again, we weren't playing games in the beginning. We weren't recruiting. We weren't doing some of our normal business things. So we were so focused on that. It really took moments like when you and I would have our meetings where you could have to kind of stop what you're doing, step back and just remember what your job used to be or what it might be in the future. And that was really important because we could get so drawn into the ugliness of it or the fact that we weren't having any fans at our football games or whatever. And, you know, instead of focusing on that, it felt really good to kind of step back and go, okay, let's look at the big picture here for a minute and let's get back into this. So doing that throughout the pandemic was really helpful. And then when we had that moment where it almost was John Curry giving us permission to kind of step out of that inward focus. So giving us permission to look ahead and to work on those things that we hadn't worked on in a year, because we almost felt like we needed that okay from him. We needed that clearance that it's okay for us to try to put people in the stands again. It's okay for us to envision a world outside of this health crisis. And so once we kind of got that okay and that permission, then it just took off. And so we did have a senior staff kind of retreat with you, and that was the kickoff. That was the moment where we sat down and we started talking about our goals again, and we hadn't done that in so long. And what we realized, since, as you mentioned, John was relatively new to Wake Forest as well, what we realized was some people in the room weren't familiar with those goals because John was so new, but also that some of us had forgotten about them because we were so focused on just getting through day to day to day. And it was refreshing for us to think again, big picture, think again about the future, still doing some of those day-to-day things, but really focusing out ahead. And it got us ready for the time when, now we were still wearing masks then, and we were still going through those things, but it got us prepared. So then when we did get to a time where student athletes were coming back and we are 8 days away from our first football game, we were ready to really run with it, and people were excited. And it put us in a good it put us in like the starting blocks for a race, right? We were ready to go. And so then when the gun went off, we just took off, and it felt good to get back to some normal business. It also feels good to know that we know what to do during COVID. So as we do have some of these additional cases coming up in some places, and we do have some more issues, and it's not gone, but we know how to do it. Whereas a year ago, we were scared, as everybody was, that we didn't really know how we were going to operate. And so now we feel like we've got some good precautions in place, and we know how to operate there, so we can still focus on that future.
Mm-hmm. So you pull the senior team together, and you really get clear
Mm-hmm.
on kind of vision and goals, and how kind of John gives the team permission / expectation to get back to, let's be thinking strategic and
Mm-hmm.
thinking longer term, not, as you said, not ignoring the reality and the in the moment responses we're going to have that needed. And kind of gives the starter pistol fired and off you go.
Mm-hmm.
So as you've been successful with that, is there anything in particular you attribute that success to, in terms of you came together, but once you kind of were out of the blocks, what did that look like for you guys to kind of implement those strategies?
Yeah, I think, when we did come together, we met in two different times. We met once and with you, and we kind of looked more at ourselves individually. We did some strength finder information, which was really kind of fun to hear about our coworkers. And so we kind of started building that house. We started at the foundation level, and that was really good. I think one of our focuses was really relationships. We have taken that, obviously relationships with now externally, but we started with those relationships in the room, and we started with the relationships with each other and communication and what that looks like to people who communicate differently. And so some people, one of the questions you asked us was about, how would you like to be communicated with? And some people were solely just email, and other people were no, in person, and we couldn't do in person. So, okay, if you can't do in person, what would you do next? So it was really interesting and fun to kind of find that out. And that way, when we are looking at relationships, we were prepared to do that externally because we had already done that in that group. I think one of the reasons why we were successful, and then in having a kind of overall, that we had another meeting where we did more big picture planning. I think the reason why that became successful, those two meetings together as a one thing, is because we really felt like as a group that we were putting together our plan that we all agreed on, that we talked about, and we all agreed was important. And so we all had some buy-in to that. We all felt that we came up with those plans as a leadership group. And so when we would go back to our different units, it was a lot easier for us to sell those plans and to support those plans because they were our plans. And we could have some healthy conversations, and people felt a lot more comfortable with each other after being apart from each other for so long. We have a lot of new people in the room too. So that really helped us kind of sprint, as we were talking about sprinting when it was time. And so, yeah, I really think it was that having that collective voice, and we've all done retreats, right? We've all gotten together and done, meetings where we're going to talk about our goals and things like that. And those sometimes aren't as successful as we'd like them to be. And I think the reason why this one was successful was because we did not have preconceived ideas going into the meeting of what was going to come out of it. We went in with a plan. You had a plan and you knew how you were going to walk us through the steps, but we didn't know what the outcome was going to be. We didn't know what our goals necessarily were going to be. We just had to see where it took us. And I think that made us all feel like we were really part of creating that message and creating those goals.
Very good. And then as if there wasn't enough change going on in college athletics, there's a little thing called name, image, likeness kicks in this summer. What was the impact of that in terms of how how you were working together and just moving forward on your goals?
Gosh, I mean, that was an example of something that, whereas COVID really affected everybody, right, both personally and professionally, the NIL space didn't necessarily affect everyone in the department. Some folks that didn't feel like they were really impacted by it didn't understand why they really needed to know about it. So the buy-in was different. The sense of urgency was different among different people in the department. So what was really important for us to do, and I don't think we went right out and did this right the first time. I mean, nobody really knew what it was going to look like. So we kind of we failed, and then we came back and we tried again and we did it better, and and we worked it out. But we really did education. So we really tried to explain to people what, at least as far as we knew, what NIL was, because it was changing. It was changing right up until the last minute. So we really tried to not feed on anything that was in the news or feed on any speculation of what it might be, and really just give the facts of this is what we know right now. And as it was getting closer and closer, it was becoming more clear. But we really didn't know until nobody knew until the very last minute. At that point, we did have a couple folks on staff who put in lots of hours, as everyone did across the country, to put together a plan that we all felt very comfortable with, a starting plan, really. That's all anyone could do. And we've been tweaking it and adjusting it as we go. But overall, just to make sure people knew about it, that we had communication and transparency, that really helped when we were having conversations later, because we weren't educating somebody later about, well, why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Why are the athletes asking for this? You know, it just, so by starting with that education piece, it really helped us later as we were trying to form our policies. And I think what we have seen overall was at the beginning, because there was kind of this mad dash where no one really knew what it was going to be until right at the last minute. And there was information of some schools, you know, giving out all this money, and there was all of these, maybe some false information in there. And people were kind of scared. What does this mean for us? There was this big blow up for a few weeks there in the beginning. And once we had our policy in and we educated our athletes and we had a system in place, it really calmed down, and it really kind of got to, now it's got to be part of our new normal going forward. Just like some of the changes we made during COVID is part of our new normal. It's not, you know, people kept saying, I can't wait until we go back to where we were. And that's not going to happen. We're never going to go back to where we were. We just move forward to this new normal. Well, the NIL space is part of our new normal now too. So now it's just part of every meeting we have in compliance, every, you know, a lot of the things we talk about in our senior staff meeting come around to, well, wait a minute, we need to think about NIL here. And so now I feel like we're adjusting to it. By no means do I think anybody has a full handle on it. I think it's one of those things that's kind of a moving target, and we just do our best. But I like our approach. I think we weren't trying to kid ourselves. We didn't think we were going to come out and be perfect on it. We just really wanted to make sure that we were providing service to our student athletes. We were making sure that they were getting all the information that we could get for them so that they could benefit as much as possible. And I think we did that, and we continue to do that.
That's great. So I kind of, they're among, as you're talking kind of, and it's part of the work that we do with Throwing Words, just kind of the hearing a lot about clarity of message, clarity of vision, even with the uncertainty that's going on, but being able to be clear about that. And then the importance of communication. And I tie in relationships with that. I mean, you mentioned even early, as you were just coming on board and establishing those relationships and being able to do that in the virtual world. But as you get the senior team back together, just the importance of the relationships and just the benefit that you saw of this was our plan, and how that really equipped the senior leaders to go back into their units. And they're not just carrying John Curry's water, or they're not just talking about somebody else's vision, but their fingerprints are on it as well, from an ownership standpoint, and the value there. And then I love how you talked about just the fact, particularly with, I mean, true with the pandemic, but with NIL, just we knew what we knew today, and then we would tweak, and we had a plan. We'd tweak and adjust. We planted the seeds early from an education standpoint to communicate, hey, here's what's going on, even if it didn't directly impact part of the department, and just the return that you saw on that early intentionality and transparency, as you talked about communication and transparency, and just the importance and kind of reaping the benefits of that. That's awesome. And it really, and I know, it's like the to be continued ... right? That you're still in the midst of all of this. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. You're still in the early days of NIL, and so I'm sure there'll be more to come. But really appreciate your time today, and and just our work that we've done over this past months and years. And I'm excited to kind of see what will happen. But any final thoughts? I mean, or is there anything you've shared a lot of great nuggets for folks, but anything else that you want to kind of parting words that you want to leave with us?
Well, Doug, I appreciate you so much. I think there were times where I felt like you were my therapist, but I was able to connect with you and really get grounded and really focus in on what was the problem, not all the noise around the problem, but what really is the problem, or okay, what is your role in this problem, and what can you do? Because there's so many things that we face in athletics that we worry about and we stress over that we can't do anything about. And so getting to that point where we can turn that off and just really focus on what we can do is so important. I think that the anxieties that everybody had, that I had coming into a new job in a new place, and then having COVID on top of it, and didn't even know who the person was in IT that I had to call when my computer wasn't working because I hadn't been here long enough. But realizing that what helped those anxieties was that clarity and having that transparency. And there were calls that we got on with some of our local, medical professionals, and they're telling us it's bad and things weren't great, but it felt a lot better knowing the truth and having that clarity and having that transparency than it did just not knowing. And so when I kind of would unload on you about the frustrations that I was having or the anxieties I was having, it was really helpful for me to kind of get that focus back. And so I've just really appreciated that through all of this and continuing going forward. So that's been very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, my pleasure. And thanks for your time today. I know that, again, we'll say it for the third time, football game 8 days away, and just a busy time of year. So I appreciate you making time for us. And we will look forward to sharing this. And we've put together a takeaway for folks. If you want to know some more about the process and some of the keys that Lindsey and John and the team at Wake have used, we'll put a link in where you can connect with that information. And we'll see you next time.